Hey guys, John here with the Pond Life Podcast. This is episode 2. Yesterday I dropped the GoPro into the spawning bed, put it in the side, and I wanted to record for about an hour or so and pick up some spawning activity for the last spawn video, but the footage that I got was not meeting what I wanted for the video. I thought that I would get some beauty of the spawn, a lot of courting, egg dropping, and maybe some flashing. But what I got was some guarding. Yesterday was pretty light on the nest. It was just males guarding nests. There weren't any females staged around. I dropped the GoPro in. I put some waders on and waded out and set it on the edge of the spawning bed. Lesson learned, I will definitely do it with the boat next time because it created some sediment in the water. But when everything started to recede and the water cleared up, there was a situation where there was a nest raid that happened. The male lost control of the nest and it became a feeding frenzy immediately. And it was kind of tragic to watch, but it's all part of the cycle of life and what happens. So I did some research and understood what happens when the male loses the nest and what happens physically and on top of that, what psychologically, what happens to the male, what happens to really the habitat for the rest of the season. So what I did was I did some research, put it up for my co-host to my guest host to take over, and they're gonna run through the format. I'm gonna run some video in the background of what I captured. So I will see you after the guest podcast portion is over.
Hey everyone, and welcome. We are actually guest hosting today for the Pond Life Podcast, which is really exciting.
It is great to be here.
And we're thrilled to be back, diving deep again into the fascinating world happening just beneath the surface of the water.
Mm-hmm.
You might remember not too long ago we did a deep dive right here, focusing on the bluegill spawning cycle. It was pretty incredible stuff.
Yeah, we talked about that male bluegill, the dedicated little architect building those perfect kind of saucer-shaped nests.
Right, in the shallows, and then guarding them like it's his life's work.
That parental care, it's absolutely fundamental. We stress that. That vigilance at the nest site is, well, it's the linchpin for getting any offspring into the pond at all.
It really is. But that deep dive, it sort of left us with this big question just kind of hanging there in the water, didn't it?
Uh-huh. What happens next?
Exactly. What happens when that vital link is broken?
Mm-hmm.
What are the consequences when that really diligent male guardian suddenly loses control of his nest?
And that's our focus today.
Yeah, this is the deep dive for that. And we're drawing all our insights directly from the detailed observations and the extensive research done by John on this very topic.
So our mission today, really leaning on John's findings, is to unpack the immediate fallout and then kind of trace the longer-term ripple effects when a male bluegill's nest is lost.
It sounds like, from John's work, this single event can trigger a surprisingly complex chain reaction.
Oh, it absolutely does. John's work really highlights just how fragile that whole nest environment is without protection.
Okay, well, before we jump headfirst into what John's research uncovered, just a quick note to you listening right now on the Pond Life Podcast.
Yeah, definitely.
If you're enjoying this deep dive, please be sure to like and subscribe to the Pond Life Podcast. That way you won't miss any future episodes.
It really helps the show.
It does. And also, if you want to explore this topic even further after we chat, check out the description below. There's additional supplemental content there drawn right from John's research.
Good stuff in there. John's work, it really shows what a significant setback losing that nest is for the male. He documented several key sort of cascading effects.
Okay, let's dive in then. Based on John's research, what's the very, very first thing that happens? That male guardian is gone. The nest is undefended. What's next?
Well, the most immediate and honestly often the most severe consequence John observed is just rapid predation. On the eggs, on the newly hatched fry, they're sitting ducks.
Right, without the male doing his thing, the guarding, the fanning to keep the water clear.
Exactly. They become an incredibly easy target. It's basically an open invitation for anything nearby that's looking for a snack.
And John's observations, did they list specific threats? I mean, I'd guess bigger fish, sure, but maybe some surprises?
Oh, absolutely. John's research pointed to a really wide array of predators moving in fast. You've got the usual suspects, other fish like bass, crappie, minnows, catfish. But his findings also noted that even other bluegill can turn opportunistic. You know, those sneaker males we talked about, or even adult females just looking for protein.
Wow, even their own kind.
Yeah. And it's not just fish. John's work shows invertebrates get in on it too. Crayfish, various aquatic insects, even snails. They'll all prey on the eggs and the helpless fry.
So John's research basically suggests the nest just instantly turns into a buffet table for the whole pond community.
Essentially, yes. That's a good way to put it. John's research indicates that in most cases he watched, an unguarded nest was completely consumed, and often within a, surprisingly short time.
How short?
Sometimes hours, sometimes even minutes, depending on, how many predators are around. This rapid consumption, it leads to the complete loss of that specific brood.
Total failure for that attempt.
Total reproductive failure. Yeah, and that's a major point John highlights in his observations. The finality of it.
Okay, so it's usually just immediate predation, gobbling everything up. Or does anything else happen to the nest site itself once the original guy isn't there defending it?
That's a great question. And yes, John's research also highlighted another pretty common event. Another male bluegill might actually try to take over the nest site.
Take it over, move in.
Yeah. This could be another parental male, maybe one who lost his own nest and is looking for a spot, or maybe even a larger satellite male trying to set up shop.
Okay, but why? Based on John's findings, what's the upside for them to take over an existing nest?
Well, John's observations suggest the main driver is the existing structure. Building a nest, it takes a lot of energy, a lot of time fanning, clearing.
Right, we covered that last time.
So taking over an already built nest saves them a ton of work. And John's findings also note they might hope, to use that established site to attract new females faster. It's prime real estate.
That makes sense. Save energy, maybe get mates quicker. But hang on, what if there are still eggs or fry in there from the original male when this new guy takes over?
Yeah, this is where John's research reveals a really crucial detail. If eggs or fry are already there from the previous male, the new male is highly unlikely to care for them.
Not gonna play stepdad.
No. In fact, John's research indicates he might even eat them himself.
Seriously?
Yeah. He needs to clear that nest out, basically reset it so he can prepare it to receive eggs from his future spawning partners. So either way, those offspring are lost, either to outside predators or, potentially eaten by the new guy moving in.
Wow. That's a tough scenario for the young ones. Okay, what about the original male, the one who built it, guarded it, and then lost it? What does John's research say happens to him right after this happens?
John's findings make it super clear. Losing a nest is a major, major setback, both reproductively and honestly physically for that male.
I bet.
Think about it, right? He's already poured significant energy into building the nest, the whole intense courtship dance, the spawning itself.
That effort.
And now, John's research emphasizes he's essentially lost his entire reproductive investment for that specific attempt. Zero offspring to show for all that hard work. It's a complete wash.
All that for nothing. That's a huge biological cost.
Yeah.
So what's his immediate next move then? What does he focus on based on John's observations?
John's research describes a pretty dramatic and immediate shift, both in his behavior and his physical state. After that intense reproductive effort, or, its abrupt failure, the male is physically wiped out, often really depleted. John's observations noted males can lose, get this, up to maybe 15% of their body weight during just one spawning period.
15%, wow.
Yeah, just from the combined effort, building, courting, constantly guarding, not really eating much. So his primary focus, immediately becomes feeding, just getting calories in to replenish those severely depleted energy reserves.
Makes sense. Survival mode kicks in.
Totally. John's findings show they'll typically move out of those shallow spawning beds. Those are really just for reproduction, and they'll head to deeper parts of the pond where, generally, there's more food available.
And his whole demeanor changes too, right, according to John's work. That aggressive territorial protector thing just evaporates.
Exactly. John's research shows that highly aggressive, get off my lawn behavior he had while guarding, it just dissipates quickly. He completely disengages from the reproductive stuff and focuses purely on survival and recovery. Foraging.
You're not defending gravel anymore.
Nope. He's just trying to eat and get his strength back.
Okay, but can he bounce back?
Yeah.
Can he try again later in the season? I remember John's research mentioned bluegill can spawn multiple times.
Yes, that's right. John's observations confirm they can be multiple spawners in a single season. Particularly in warmer places, like North Carolina, where John did a lot of work, the spawning season can stretch out for months.
So there's hope.
Well, if the nest was lost relatively early in the season, John's findings suggest he might have a chance. He could potentially recover enough energy, build a new nest, and try to attract females again for another go.
But reading between the lines of this research, it sounds like it's definitely not a guaranteed second chance, even if he tries.
Correct. John's research indicates the timing is really, really key. Earlier loss gives more recovery time, more opportunity. But his actual ability to successfully build another nest, court females again, and then successfully raise that brood, it's heavily limited by his energy reserves.
Right. He might just be too run down.
Exactly. Repeated failures or losing nests multiple times in a season, according to John's findings, can lead to a severely depleted state. He might just not have the juice left for another successful attempt. Even if technically there's time left in the season, it's a massive energy drain.
Okay, so losing the nest is clearly a huge individual blow for that specific male. What about the bigger picture, though? Does John's research touch on consequences for, like, the whole bluegill colony?
Or the population in the pond. It absolutely does. John's observations show that the males who are successfully holding and guarding those nests, they're often the most dominant ones, usually the largest, maybe the genetically fittest individuals in that particular spawning group.
The top dogs, basically.
Kind of, yeah. So losing a nest, especially if maybe it was forcibly taken by a rival male, that can represent a temporary hit to his social standing within that colony structure.
Interesting. And this research, it also points to increased vulnerability for the male after he loses the nest.
Yes.
Even beyond the social stuff.
Yes, that's another consequence John documented. Think about it. While he's actively guarding, he's hyper alert. He's watching for danger constantly.
Right, gotta protect the kids.
But John's findings show that once he leaves that nest, his focus shifts entirely to feeding. Plus, he might still be physically exhausted from the whole ordeal. So moving from the relative safety of the shallow nesting area out into more open feeding zones, well, according to John's observations, that exposes him more to a wider range of bigger predators, like largemouth bass lurking in deeper water or ospreys hunting from above, herons stalking the edges.
So he's potentially weak and in a more dangerous spot.
Exactly, more vulnerable.
Now, this next point feels really crucial, especially from a population angle, and it's something anglers might directly influence. John's findings talk specifically about fishing pressure.
Yes, this raises a really important question, particularly from John's research perspective, looking at fisheries management. A significant factor John noted that contributes to males losing nests is, well, anglers removing them.
Catching the guardian off the nest.
Right. If large dominant parental males, the very ones doing the guarding, are caught and removed from their nest by fishermen, it creates a void, a vacancy in that critical spawning zone.
And John's research makes a direct link between that void and more success for those other types of males, the cuckolders, the sneakers, and satellites.
Yes. What's really fascinating here, based on John's work, is that removing those big guardians often leads to significantly increased reproductive success for those sneaker and satellite males.
Remind us what their strategy is again.
So John's findings describe these as alternative tactics. These guys mature earlier, they stay smaller, and crucially, they don't build nests or provide any parental care. Zero. Their whole game is darting in super quick while a female is spawning at a parental male's nest.
Stealing fertilization.
Exactly. They try to fertilize some of the eggs before the parental male can.
Okay, and John's research directly connects this shift, who's actually succeeding at reproducing, to the problem of stunted bluegill populations.
Yes, this is a really critical insight from John's research. It has major implications for the overall health and size structure of bluegill in a pond. Repeated removal of those big dominant parental males, especially through angling, it can directly contribute to bluegill populations becoming stunted, which basically means you end up with a pond full of tons and tons of small fish and very few, if any, bigger ones.
And how does removing the big guys cause that, according to John?
John's findings suggest it happens because those large, often genetically superior males, they normally occupy the best nesting spots. And their presence, their aggression, it actually deters smaller males from maturing and reproducing too early. It keeps them in check, lets them grow bigger first.
Okay, so the big guys suppress the little guys' reproduction.
To an extent, yes. But when those big guys are gone, removed by anglers, that competitive pressure vanishes. So the smaller males can mature earlier and reproduce successfully using their sneaker or satellite strategy.
And because they mature early?
Their own growth slows way down once they hit maturity, so you just get this proliferation, this explosion of small, early maturing fish over time. It's a phenomenon John's observations directly documented.
Wow. Okay, so losing the nest, especially when it involves taking out those large prime males through things like fishing, has these complex ripple effects. It's not just bad for that one fish or that one batch of eggs. It can actually change the whole population's genetics and size structure over time. That's all from John's research.
Precisely. As John's research clearly shows, the specific genetic contribution of that particular parental male for that spawning event is just lost with the brood. If this happens frequently across many nests, removing many dominant males year after year, it can genuinely shift the genetic makeup and the average size of bluegill in that pond over generations. It's a really clear example of how, human activity like fishing can influence population dynamics in ways that aren't always obvious at first glance.
Okay, so John's deep dive here, it paints this incredibly clear, detailed picture. It shows just how critical that male nest guarding, that parental care really is, and all the things that go wrong when it gets disrupted.
Definitely.
So why should this matter to you listening right now? Maybe you're an angler, maybe you own a pond, maybe you manage fisheries, or maybe you're just, curious about nature. Why care about a bluegill losing its nest?
Well, John's research, I think, gives us a much deeper understanding of the delicate balance, right? And the complex interactions happening constantly in a pond ecosystem.
It's more than just water and fish.
Oh, much more. Whether you care about fishing quality, catching bigger fish, or the basic ecology, or maybe you just appreciate the incredible lives of the creatures around us, seeing these consequences, these cascades from one single event.
A male losing his nest.
Yeah, it just reveals the intricate interconnectedness between individual behavior, different reproductive strategies, survival rates, and even the long-term health and structure of the whole population. John's observations really give you a deeper appreciation for the drama unfolding beneath the surface.
That interconnectedness is absolutely spot on. It really does make you look at a quiet, sunny spot along the pond edge completely differently, doesn't it?
It really does.
Okay, so just to quickly recap the core takeaways from John's deep dive into this.
Yeah.
Losing a nest almost certainly means total loss of the offspring, either through super quick predation by, almost anything in the pond.
Or potentially takeover and consumption by a rival male.
Right. It's also a massive energy drain and a huge reproductive setback for the original male. It forces him into recovery mode. Maybe he can try again, but success is way less likely. Depends on timing, energy.
And it makes him more vulnerable for a while, too.
Good point. And then at the population level, John's research really highlights how frequently losing those large, dominant parental males, especially due to things like selective angling, can actually push a population towards being stunted.
Favoring the success of those smaller, non-parental males.
Yeah, shifting the whole dynamic. It really underscores the vital role those big parental males play, way beyond just guarding their own little patch of gravel and eggs.
Absolutely. Their presence matters.
It really does. John's research, it just makes you wonder about all the hidden struggles, the complex strategies, the constant competition playing out just out of sight, doesn't it? All geared towards survival, towards getting a chance to pass on those genes.
Gives you a whole new layer of appreciation.
It definitely does. Well, thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into John's research on what happens when a male bluegill loses his nest.
Hope you found it interesting.
We certainly did. And hey, if you have sources or topics you'd love us to deep dive into in the future, maybe based on your own curiosity or some research you've come across, please let us know.
Yeah, leave comments or suggestions for other podcast topics. We're always interested.
We love exploring new areas, especially based on what you're interested in and the sources you might share.
Definitely.
And one last time, if you're listening on the Pond Life podcast, please hit that like button and subscribe for more great content like this. And don't forget that extra supplemental material from John's research is waiting for you in the description if you want to go even deeper.
Thanks again for tuning in, everyone.
We'll catch you on the next deep dive.
Well, that was interesting. It was more than just the male losing the nest and feeding going on. What happens to that male long term? How it's more exposed to predators and what happens physiologically. That was an interesting piece. And what we see here, you think about if an angler pulls a male off a bed, essentially the same thing will happen, but depending if that fish goes back into the water or not, the reality is the nest is lost. So I hope you enjoyed the podcast. If you have any further comments on the topic or ideas for other content, please leave it in the comments. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Thanks.